Hello and welcome to another episode of Monbiosis on COP26.tv. And today we're talking about, well, the really devious and deceptive behaviour of the oil and gas industry, whose lobbying for so long has prevented effective change. It's prevented us from tackling the greatest crisis humanity has ever faced, which is systemic environmental breakdown. And with me today are three inspiring, fantastic campaigners who have all been struggling against the immense financial and political power of the oil and gas industries. We've got Kairin van Sweeden, Caroline Rance and Sarah Finch in the studio. Thank you all very much for joining me. And we're going to talk about just how to confront the behemoth, the sort of hegemonic power of these incredibly big legacy industries. So, Sarah, could I start with you? Could you tell me about your work and what you're trying to do to stand up against oil and gas?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, George. So right now I'm fronting a legal challenge to a planning permission for massive expansion of a small oil site in Surrey. So in 2019, Surrey County Council, which had only 2 months before declared a climate emergency, they gave planning permission for 4 new oil wells and 20 years of oil production at Horse Hill in Surrey, which is a tiny little site. Um, I Me and many others had been campaigning on this site for years before that, in every way possible, from objecting to planning applications, holding public meetings, marches, protests. There were people that were doing direct action, all of that. But sort of it all came in the end. We think the only last chance we've got of stopping this going ahead is through getting the planning permission overturned. So that's what I'm doing, and it's been, well, it's a small little site in Surrey, but it's achieved a high profile just lately because although it's me against Surrey County Council, the government, in the form of the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, has kind of attached itself to the case as an interested party on the side of Surrey County Council. So they are spending taxpayers' money actively defending a permission for fossil fuel production, 20 years, which will take them right up to the net zero deadline. So yeah, so that's our focus. My request for the judicial review was turned down twice, but then we had the judicial review and we lost. And the judge sort of said no, it was fine. What Surrey had done was perfectly legal. But I appealed, and an appeal court judge has said no, this is a matter of high public interest. The ramifications are significant. It deserves to be heard again. So in just 2 weeks' time, on the 16th of November, we'll be in the appeal court, arguing that Surrey County Council should not have allowed this to go ahead without considering the full indirect greenhouse gas emissions. That's what it's in the end, it's an issue which seems like a no-brainer to us. They shouldn't have done it, but it hinges on very fine legal points, and the legal point we're fighting is that the environmental impact assessment should have looked at the emissions from the oil when it is burned eventually, which could amount to 10 million tonnes. But the council and the previous judge said no, they were only obliged to look at the greenhouse gas emissions sort of from the development itself, so the generators and the HGV sort of on the site, rather than the oil once it's taken off site and burned, the far greater amount. And we all know the only point of getting that oil out of the ground is so that it can be taken away and refined. Most of it will be burned. So if you can't assess the greenhouse gas emissions at the point you take the fuel out of the ground, when can you? You never will be. It makes a mockery of any kind of net zero target. So yeah, who don't know how it's going to go, but we've got another bash in the appeal court coming up.
It sounds like a sort of classic case of sort of strategic institutional stupidity, isn't it? Just sort of seeing it in as narrow terms as possible in order not to make the right decision. And also like an extraordinary David versus Goliath case. I mean, it's Sarah versus Big Oil. Has this had a big impact on your own life?
Well, it's Sarah versus Surrey County Council, but and it's not big oil, it's little oil, because the oil company we're up against, UK Oil and Gas, is actually a tiny minnow, although they have huge aspirations. And they talk about millions of barrels of oil under the Weald in the southeast of England. They've also got a site in Turkey, but they are a small player compared with some of the others that you guys are up against.
But symbolic of the huge global fight that all of us are involved in. So, Kairin, tell me about your role in this fight and what you've been doing to carry on the great work that Sarah's doing down in Surrey.
So, George, I am involved in the Paid to Pollute campaign. I'm a plaintiff in the Paid to Pollute campaign, and we're taking the UK's Oil and Gas Authority to court to challenging them on their thinking about maximum economic recovery. And our argument is that this is not maximum economic recovery at all, because the oil companies are being paid to pollute. Essentially, they are getting massive subsidies. So the North Sea is the most cost-effective place to drill for oil in the world. So the government's perception of maximum economic recovery doesn't align with their agreements on the Paris Accord, and we are challenging them about that in court on the 8th of December.
And again, having to fight through the courts to get the results which, we shouldn't have to fight for. I mean, the government claims to be committed to preventing climate breakdown. If it were committed to preventing climate breakdown, these projects should not be going ahead.
Yes, it's ridiculous, George. People shouldn't be fighting in the courts to save their lives. The government is there essentially to protect the people and not allow pollution which will endanger the people of the UK and other countries as well.
Caroline, one of the most egregious of these projects is this Cambo oil field that developers want to get into to the northwest of the Shetlands. Tell me about that and about your role in trying to stop its exploitation.
Yeah, you're right. The Cambo proposal is absolutely egregious. So for those who don't know, the Cambo oil field is the second largest undeveloped field in UK waters. It holds 800 million barrels of oil. As you say, it's 125 kilometres northwest of the Shetland Islands. And earlier this year, oil giant Shell and a private equity-backed company called Siccar Point Energy applied to the UK government for permission to open this brand new oil field. Now, there was an initial license for exploration of this field about 20 years ago. All that license does is allow the license holders the right to search for oil. They don't have automatic right to start drilling the field for extraction, and that's what they're trying to get now. But the climate impacts of Cambo would be completely devastating. So in the first phase alone, they want to take out 170 million barrels of oil. Now that's the sort of climate equivalent of running 18 coal-fired power stations for 1 year. And that would continue until 2050, which of course is the year that the UK government has said that we will reach net zero. And we know that that's too late already. But that's just the beginning. They want to keep going after that. So on Siccar Point Energy's website, they say that phase 2 would go for full field development. And that means getting as much of that 800 million barrels of oil out of the ground as they can beyond 2050. It's completely incompatible with climate targets and climate obligations. So I work for Friends of the Earth Scotland, and I'm just one part of the Stop Cambo campaign, which is a huge network of individuals, grassroots groups and organisations fighting the Cambo proposal. And we're really using every tool in the box. And we're trying, mass public, media, political, international pressure. We're working through everything from street protests, direct advocacy, inside Parliament, people on the ground contacting their MPs, research, legal avenues. We're throwing everything at this, and we've done a lot. The campaign has only been going for 4 months, and we've gained huge momentum. And now every single time in the last few days when the UK government is on platform talking about the great climate leaders they are at COP26. They're getting asked every single time about Cambo. So we're going to keep fighting until this project is stopped.
That's very inspiring. Thanks, Caroline. Tell me about the forces arraigned against you and the pushback that you're getting from the oil industry and its backers.
Yeah, the oil industry, like, we're throwing everything we have and they're throwing everything they have right back at us, and they have a lot of resources. So they're mobilising their lobbies. So Oil and Gas UK is an industry body that lobbies on behalf of fossil fuel companies. They're constantly briefing the press, briefing ministers against us, making all sorts of ludicrous claims about the fact that, you know, we need Cambo, we need this oil for our energy security, making completely unsubstantiated claims about the number of jobs. They are, you know, they'll be fighting this every single step of the way. They have huge might, they have huge resources, but they don't have science on their side, and we will fight them every step of the way.
What's exciting to me about this program? I mean, I've been talking in other programs to people all over the world, some amazing, extraordinary, inspiring activists. But here we are in the UK, three wonderful campaigners in the UK, the nation which is hosting the COP talks, and indeed in Scotland, you know, those talks are surrounded by attempts to carry on extracting oil and gas in a world where we know it can't be done. So, I mean, first of all, it's extraordinary hypocrisy, isn't it, Kairin, on behalf of the UK governments? But it doesn't end there, does it? I mean, they're actually using financial instruments to accelerate the extraction of oil and gas. Tell me something about that.
Yes, George. So it is extraordinary hypocrisy indeed. And yes, the financial instruments used to help the oil companies to keep extracting oil are the tax breaks that the UK government are allowing them. And you know, this makes the UK waters often in the North Sea the most profitable place for you to extract oil. It is incredible that we are hosting COP26 and we are talking about opening another oil field, the Cambo oil field off the coast of Shetland. This really will continue the acceleration of the climate crisis. And yeah, it's massive hypocrisy on the UK government's part.
And I understand petroleum revenue tax is now charged at zero. It's been zero rated. And partly as a result of that, North Sea oil and gas will soon cost the Exchequer more money than it makes from them. So, you know, the question which comes into my head, excuse my French, what's the bloody point?
Okay, George, yes. What is the point, you know, when it's really so economically unviable to keep extracting oil and gas from the North Sea? I would posit that the point is that people in this government, perhaps in the previous government as well, are maybe enraptured by people from the oil and gas industry. But what's more tragic about this is that, you know, I've certainly seen defunding of renewables projects in Scotland since I returned to Scotland from the Netherlands in 2006. And, you know, we had a project that was about to start in Dundee, where it was going to be Solar City, because your viewers might be surprised to know that Dundee is the sunniest city in the whole of the UK. So that was pulled when the coalition came into power. And also there were also going to be some lines fed between Orkney and the mainland, because actually Orkney makes more renewable energy than it requires. And that was Ed Davey of the Lib Dems that pulled that project. So I've really seen some really great projects pulled, defunded, while the oil companies are being funded to what essentially kill all of us, which is why it's so important, all of this climate activism. And I'd just like to congratulate the other panelists on the work that they're doing towards doing something about this.
Kairin, if I could just ask you one more question for now. Maximise economic recovery of oil and gas. That is official government policy. Tell me about that. What does it mean and why?
So, George, maximum economic recovery. Yeah, this is the goal of the Oil and Gas Authority. and it is completely incompatible with our climate targets. Really what the Oil and Gas Authority are positing is that really we bring all the oil and gas that's possible out of the North Sea, and we just can't do this. This will kill us, and it will kill the planet. So we really have to move away from that. And it's completely illogical, considering the danger that we're in now. And the report from the IPCC makes it very clear that we have code red for humanity. So, there is no economic logic to all of this. You can't have an economy on a dead planet.
Sarah, and it sometimes seems, and I don't want to sound despairing, but as if the entire weight of the state, the weight of the law, the weight of big money is arrayed against us in fights like yours. What can you say to cheer me up about that, and to say, actually, we can turn this around?
Oh, I think things are turning themselves around, despite, as you say, the sort of institutions and the way things are done are against us. But just in the last few months, a lot of onshore, well, 5 I can think of onshore oil and gas extraction applications have been refused by local councils. So only yesterday, Biscathorpe in Lincolnshire, they refused an application. A couple of weeks ago on the Isle of Wight, and then also Dunsfold in Surrey, Bolcombe, West Newton. So planning committees are understanding that we don't want to have these developments, but they've not been able to do it on climate grounds. These are applications, although the objectors and the councillors in the meetings talking about climate fully understand that we cannot get any more fossil fuels out of the ground. We must refuse these things. They can't refuse on those grounds because the planning policy isn't strong enough. So they're refused on things like landscape, traffic. Obviously those are important too, but in my view, clearly in my experience, climate policy just needs to be really tightened up. If the government is serious about having a net zero target, it needs to make sure that planning policy isn't getting into the way of that. In Surrey County Council, got away with and was told by a judge that they'd done the right thing in in actually allowing the developer to exclude indirect emissions. So I think that a cause for optimism is that the decisions are going the right way, but planning policy needs to follow it. And then another thing that I just mention is regulation. When these sites are up and running, the regulation is really poor. The Environment Agency don't have the resources. They don't visit the sites. They rely on, my experience is all with really small onshore operators. I don't know how it works with the big guys, but these sites, so just recently some researchers went round with a camera that can detect methane and other toxic gases. Greenhouse gases. They found 5 places on the Horse Hill site where methane was leaking. It's not a big site, and it's just about the newest one there is, so it should be state of the art. So regulation is really poor. That needs to be improved, and planning policy. And just hope Mr. Gove is going to look at it in his new job and think, right, put a presumption against fossil fuels instead of a presumption in favour.
And is anyone campaigning for that change in the law nationally?
Not really, not that I'm aware of, or not in any very concerted way. We are down in the Weald because we've identified this problem. So with another campaigner, I wrote an article about it for the Environmental Law Journal. But no, I think that what happens with our appeal this month is going to dictate what we do next. And certainly if once again the appeal judges agree that the environmental impact assessment doesn't have to cover indirect emissions, then that's time for a big campaign on that subject.
Yes, thank you. Well, please keep me in the loop on that, because I'd like to write about it if it comes to that. Thank you. Now, Caroline, repeatedly what we hear from the Oil and Gas Association, from the individual companies, and indeed from the government, is it's about jobs. And if you don't extract the oil and gas, well, people are going to lose their jobs, and vulnerable communities are going to lose out. How do you respond to that?
First of all, with regards to Cambo, Cambo is actually unlikely to bring significant jobs to Scotland. So Siccar Point Energy, the firm that are leading the development, they have already given the contract for engineering and construction work of Cambo Field to a firm based in Singapore. So all of those initial jobs offshored already. And the operation of Cambo is designed to be with a floating platform, and that only requires 100 to 150 workers whenever it's up and running at maximum operation. And the nature of the industry means that those people could be drafted in from anywhere in the world. So there's wild claims about, thousands of jobs being supported by Cambo, and there's really no evidence for it. What there is evidence for is to show that in the last year, over 10,000 workers have been made redundant from the oil and gas industry, and many of those workers have reported that they are unable to transfer their existing skills and their experiences to jobs in the renewable industry. So the focus now, instead of trying to keep a flagging industry alive, the focus has to be on a just transition for those oil and gas workers. And that's something that we're working towards with workers and with their trade unions. And this process has to have workers and trade unions at the heart of it. Governments say that they're committed to just transition, but we're not actually seeing them sit down around the table with those workers and ask them, what do you need to help you move out of this industry and into renewables? They need funding to move into new training programs, and crucially, the government has to create the jobs, good green jobs in renewables and other industries for them to move into, and that's simply not happening at the minute.
And if this transition were to happen, if we manage to push past the power of the oil and gas industry and switch to clean technologies, what would be the implications for jobs then? Would we see more jobs or fewer jobs?
We've certainly got the capacity to see more jobs. So research has shown that there could be as many as 3 jobs created for every 1 oil and gas job that we currently have. But that requires the right policy and support from government, it requires investment, it requires a plan. So there are a huge number of very decent, good jobs that could be created, well-paid, unionised jobs in the clean industries of the future. So there's great potential, but again, it needs the government to take that action, and that needs public pressure to make sure that they take that action.
Kairin, in political terms, what needs to change to overthrow this power of big oil and gas, really to block the changes that we need to see?
Well, George, I would say that first and foremost, you have to overthrow and vote out the current laissez-faire, neoliberal, neoclassical, libertarian government that you have in Westminster right now. Please get rid of them, vote them out. Their belief that the market will sort everything out is really quite childish and dogmatic. And we really need to be thinking about our country now on a war footing, as opposed to thinking that the market will sort this out. So during the Second World War, everyone was mobilised to deal with the Second World War. And that's the situation we should put ourselves in now, is that the government should do the deficit spending as it did during the Second World War and mobilise the population to fight climate change. This is an existential threat to our lives. Also for, the concept that when you come into government, you think about building a bridge between Ireland and Scotland to improve commerce between these two areas, is just bizarre to me when, just before this government came in, I was watching news footage of people being flooded out of their homes in South Yorkshire, and in some cases it was their businesses as well. These are unglamorous things, but really flood defences surely have to come first before you think about building a bridge across to Ireland. So yeah, the government has to get a lot more serious about dealing with the climate crisis, but I despair that this government will not be the one that will do it.
But we have a group of Tory MPs saying, well, even the government's current plans are unaffordable. We don't have the money to do the sort of things that you're talking about.
Yeah, George, this is a complete nonsense. The government is the monopoly issuer of the currency. They cannot run out of money. So they can create as much money as they like. Obviously there are limitations to that as far as inflation is concerned, But, if you have the real resources and you can mobilize them, and in this case, the real resources are, for example, people who are not working and who would gladly swap doing perhaps jobs that they've not been happy in for a long time to do something more meaningful for their community, for their country. And so I would say that the government has to step in and organise that. Again, I despair that this government will not be the one that will do it. But for example, here in Aberdeen, the Aberdeen workers, they're very heavily involved in the oil industry. So they have to have a just transition where the government will really have to step in and ensure that that happens. Because for private companies, their raison d'etre is profit. It is not to employ people. But the government must make sure that it is always the employer of last resort, and it can always be the employer of last resort. So, to say the government doesn't have money is a complete nonsense. If it runs a deficit, then there's more money in the private sector. The government's deficit is literally our savings. A government is not like a household. If I print money in my garage, I will get a very lengthy prison sentence for doing so. That's just not allowed. So the government can never run out of money. I believe we have the resources to get this in place. What the government needs to do is mobilise the resources with the currency that it creates alone as a monopoly.
So we're looking here at a fundamental challenge to the system. As Kairin says, it's a challenge to the whole story that they tell us about the economy, which is basically a false story. As Caroline says, it's a challenge to the whole story of what's good for local people. And as Sarah points out, it's a major legal challenge as well. So we're really taking on the entire system in some ways, aren't we? And Sarah, how can we as citizens, as activists who aren't directly involved as you are, support the necessary changes? What can we most effectively do as campaigners?
Well, that's a big question, and I think there's so many possible different answers depending on who you are and where you are. I think for if you live somewhere where there is onshore or offshore nearby oil and gas developments, I think is to keep absolutely vigilant, find out what's going on, look for applications, and then link with the people who oppose them. And I think something that I've learned over a few years is to just respect and get involved with everybody. There are so many different ways of campaigning, and there's too much division. I think residents, direct action, protesters, people who like writing detailed responses to planning applications, we're all on the same side and we all need to work together. And I do feel optimistic because now everyone, thanks to the COP, thanks to your work, George, all these cases are really high profile, and people understand, people get that getting fossil fuels out of the ground is wrong, and people want to stop that. Caroline,
do you share Sarah's optimism?
I absolutely share Sarah's optimism. I'm in Glasgow at the minute at COP26, and there, it's 2 days before the big climate march, but there are already tens of thousands of people planning to be out on the street in Glasgow on Saturday, marching for climate justice, marching and raising our collective voices to keep fossil fuels in the ground, to take the action that we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. The fossil fuel industries have money, they have might, but there are more of us and we are right. So I think just getting involved in a campaign, you might not feel that you want to be out on the street marching, but you might, as Sarah said, be one of the people who can write to your MP, who can, do a bit of research. You could be the social media person. You can be the person for your local group that, books the meeting rooms and takes notes at the meetings. Every single one of these roles are valid and they are needed because we are a huge movement. And I think that's one of the really great things about being in Glasgow this weekend, is feeling so connected, not just to other campaigners across the UK, but to other campaigners from around the world. And we're all fighting for the same thing, whether it's our different projects here in the UK or whether it's standing alongside people who are resisting fossil fuels in other countries. And, we're fighting this site battle by site battle, but these are totemic cases, and the real reason that we're doing this, as you say, is to change the overall system. It's to scrap that legal obligation to maximise economic recovery. It's to scrap that favourable tax regime, and it's to shift all of that support and all of those finances into renewables and into a just transition and a livable future for everyone.
Kairin, Caroline mentioned those crucial words, leave fossil fuels in the ground. It sounds amazingly simple. Is it really that simple?
It really is quite simple for the government to do this. The government has the financial clout and the control of the resources, essentially, to make this happen. Again, I don't think that this is the government that will do that. But the other thing that I think is really important to say, George, is that people need to encourage people who they think should be in positions of power to go into positions of power. So if you think you have someone in your community, in your political party, you think they're a really good egg, they're a communitarian, they're an environmentalist, these are the kind of people that we want to be in positions of power. So, you know, if they're a little bit shy and they don't really think that much of themselves, maybe you need to give them a bit of a boost. If you know these people, push them forward so that they are in positions of power, rather than people who simply go into politics because it is something that they think they can perhaps make money from, or have power over other people. So, you know, really, we've got to change who is in positions of power, and get the right people in there.
Kairin, that's a lovely, inspiring note on which to finish. Thank you very much, Kairin van Sweeden, Caroline Rance, Sarah Finch. I'm so grateful to you all. Really fantastic discussion. Many thanks.